The Spinoff Podcast Network.
Love news but find keeping up a bit overwhelming? Well, Newsable is the answer. It's your daily fix of everything worth talking about. I'm your host, Imogen Wells, and in about 15 minutes, I'll bring you what you need to know from Aotearoa and around the world and explain why it matters. Newsable tackles the big stuff without taking itself too seriously. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is brought to you by SparkLab, offering inspiration and practical advice to help businesses find their edge. To hear more about SparkLab, including details about the latest events, workshops, and business tools, visit sparklab.co.nz. And now, here's your host, Simon Pound.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is made by the Spinoff with help from Callaghan Innovation, New Zealand's innovation agency. Here's your host, Simon Pound.
Last year, a medical cannabis producer called Hikurangi Cannabis Company came out of seemingly nowhere and broke the internet, crashing PledgeMe servers as it became the fastest local company to crowdfund into the millions, doing 2 million odd in less than 10 minutes. But as with most overnight successes, it was on the back of years of work. It's a long journey to change an illegal activity well connected with an area to a legal one. Locals from Ruatoria and around Ngati Porou and the east coast, of which Hikurangi is a significant Maunga to local iwi, were given first dibs and invested ahead of the public raise. And the company that inked deals overseas that could stretch into the hundreds of millions has gained first low THC and very recently higher THC trial and growth rights. And this is while not compromising on trying to create access and jobs for people that have fallen foul of the prohibition laws. While other companies have gone out with a very medical company type branded approach, Hikurangi proudly showed their dreadlocked and rasta-hatted workers. This is about honesty, integrity, and most importantly, actually following through. The 20 plus local jobs and big milestones hit have Hikurangi as a leader, a founding member of the Industry Council, and a beacon to many companies looking to take a community-led approach to the legal cannabis industry. To talk the journey, where we are and where we go from here, founder CEO Manu Kari joins us now. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Thank you for joining us. Hey, tell us, how was it that you got started with Hikurangi Cannabis? Because it didn't start as a company first, did it? It was a community trust.
Yeah, so 2015, hapu clusters, sub-tribal groups, groups of marae around the coast have been, back then we were getting together and talking about development. In 2012, Ngati Porou had settled with the Crown, and so people had kind of moved out of thinking about what that redress was going to be and then actually how to use it or what the future was going to be. So these clusters of hapu got together, and focus was mostly on things like education, cultural revitalisation, and environmental protection, sort of cleaning up some of the impacts of farming, 100 years of farming and forestry and so on. And the elephant in the room was the jobs, and so only about 5% of the tribe still live within the tribal lands. Most of the families have moved away over the last 50, 60 years. And the question was, how do we create something that's going to generate economic development and jobs for the area? And no one was really that confident in doing it, but everyone knew that it needed to happen. So a few of us got together, and we looked at what the options were. We got some scientists, some some retiring scientists who had been in government service or involved in some innovative industries over the years, land-based primary industries, and got them up and they looked around and they came up with a bunch of ideas, and we had a public meeting. There were sort of 30, 35 people that came out to that to hear some of the opportunities, and we were looking for high value industries that could be given our geographic distance to markets both in New Zealand and offshore, needed to be something reasonably high value. We were seeing how farming and forestry, high volume, fairly low value commodities weren't going very far, very fast. And bioactive extracts seemed like a really promising area. So we were looking at natural resources, indigenous species, particularly kānuka, mānuka, kawakawa, and then looked at things like kina and shellfish and so on. And so they came up with a few of these ideas, and we had these people, and we progressed some of those ideas. And a month or so later, met again. There were 10 people at the next meeting, and we looked at sort of maybe setting up a trust or something that could help local businesses. We looked at Kaitaia with their resource recovery centre that employed quite a few people as a social enterprise. And there was, general support for doing something. We went away, did a bit more work. A couple of weeks later, met again, and there were only 5 people at the next meeting. I thought, geez, we better do something, or it's going to be Panapo, who's the other sort of co-founder, and myself will be the last men standing. So we agreed at that meeting to form a company. We appointed the 5 people there as the directors. Very few of us had any sort of directorial experience, and we thought we want to make it a company that benefits the community. It's not about private interests for this entity. So we'll see if we can make it a charitable company. We didn't even know if such a thing existed. And we went away and set that up. And those five individuals, one's a farmer, one's a grandmother, and another's a beneficiary. Panapu and myself became the directors of Hikurangi Enterprises. We set up that company, and we're fortunate to get it as a charitable company after some negotiation with the people that register charities. And that was because we also set up another charity in time that was a charitable trust as the sole shareholder of that company. So the company's goal is to raise funds for the charitable trust. The charitable trust's goal is economic development, relief of poverty in the area. And it's fair to say both of them have a goal of job creation. Those entities were established, and then that charitable entity didn't have any money or anything. My friend and myself contributed some funds and some time, my time, for a couple of years. We were then able to get some philanthropic support. We formed a limited partnership, and that entity is called Hikurangi Bioactives. So that's 60% owned by the charitable entity, 40% by myself and my friend. And that's really where a bunch of activities have happened. So the indigenous organisms, bioactives research and development. We got into kānuka extracts and clinical trials and things with those products, and partnered with some other companies that were already further advanced. And that work got us into, when medical cannabis came along, we were quite well set up. So someone came to us one day and said, have you thought about growing hemp? And it hadn't been on our radar. There was a family in Gisborne who had just got a very small 30 square metre trial plot. They got their licence, and they helped us get a licence under Hikurangi Enterprises and grow our first crop of hemp. They've provided some seed. And that was end of 2016. So sort of within a year we were growing hemp. When we planted it, we weren't sure what we were going to do with it, whether it was for fibre or food or pharmaceuticals. By the time we harvested it 3-4 months later, it was pretty clear that pharmaceuticals and medical cannabis was where we wanted to head. That was the highest value opportunity from that resource, and we could see the sort of trajectory of the regulations and overseas what the industry was doing. So, since beginning of 2017, that's been our focus for cannabis.
And you hadn't set up to do that, but how did it strike you when that idea came along? In the fact that there's a wonderful growing tradition in the East Coast that maybe hasn't always had the ability to thrive within the law.
Yeah, that was certainly a big factor in our consideration when we looked at hemp and thought, this is something we want to do. Actually, one of the natural resources we have is our biggest resource is our people, and as you say, there's a lot of experience on the coast in growing cannabis, and it was a natural fit. That's a large reason why we decided to give that a go. Yeah, and it's it has been the centre of cannabis production in New Zealand for a long time, and there's some real expertise there. And as we know, some of those people have suffered a lot as a result of their decisions and need to supplement whatever other income they have with cannabis supply to other parts of the country.
And so interesting when you've got the background there as well of forestry being such a big, 1/4 of the economy down there, but ecologically so damaging and also on such long time frames. To have this crop come along, it must have been amazing to think, well, we've got something that's a nitrogen fixer that's on a year turnaround that doesn't leave slash on Tolaga Bay.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how much of the land that's planted in forest will ever be planted in cannabis. It tends to be fairly steep, erosion-prone land, which obviously is problematic when you come to clear-fell harvest it. Having said that, cannabis comes from the Himalayas, which are pretty erosion-prone or at least very steep lands, and if we got really serious, we could cultivate it in terraced areas around those hills. But I guess ultimately our goal and vision would be that there's enough revenue generated from the good land that's arable and croppable on the flats and easy country that we could let some of that steep land retire. And it's our work with bioactives from indigenous trees and plants as well, that if we can generate another source of revenue for landowners, the choices to not plant and not to not plant pine trees and not to farm the land, but the derive income from other sources is real, and that's another big part of what we're trying to do as part of the Hikurangi group.
Wow, so like retire pine forest and then have kanuka or manuka.
That's right. Yeah, and people have seen manuka honey is a great example of what people thought was scrub and kind of abandoned land turning into something hugely valuable. So we've got that example now where, indigenous plants can derive some really high value product. It's just putting in the time and money to do the research and develop those products and channels to market and convince consumers that, provide the science to show that those, and many of them are traditional treatments, are effective in modern medicine.
Tell me about the journey to getting the company up and going, because from starting with that first trial, very quickly emerged as a real leader in the industry.
Yeah, I think the media really like cannabis, and so we've got a story that resonates with people. I think we're trying to do something different, but we were certainly one of the first movers in medical cannabis and taking some big risks in that area. People were saying, it's not possible at this stage, don't do it. And I guess we looked overseas and could see what was happening and decided that it was worth taking those risks and investing the time and money into trying to do something. And so over time we got some good support around the company structures, and the idea of bringing it out of that bioactives was an important one, in creating a structure that would allow others to invest. And part of it was, how do we create ownership, not just jobs, but real ownership for locals, and what structures and mechanisms are going to best serve that goal. So setting up an investment company that the crowdfunders could invest into, that would then own shares in the cannabis company, was a strategic decision. And that was really designed because we knew that there's a cap of 2 million on crowdfunding. We were going to need more than that. We were going to need institutional investors. They weren't going to necessarily want to deal with 1,500 or however many crowdfunding shareholders we ended up with. So that was a need for this other vehicle to be established. And so that those sort of decisions and structures were put in place over 2017 and got us ready by early 2018 to be offering it to the public and going out to institutional investors.
That idea of equity is so cool, because if you do look at forestry, for example, where although there are good jobs for the area. The fact that it's owned so far away, maybe, and there isn't that kind of spirit of kaitiaki in the ownership when it's so far away, maybe there wouldn't be slash. Maybe there wouldn't be the problems of the discarded wood washing up onto the beaches if it was owned with a different viewpoint.
Potentially, yeah. And I think what, again, we're hopefully doing is creating a bit of a model for others, whether it's families or hapu iwi or companies that want to do something with the community. There's a structure there now that others within, like in the Hikurangi group, within the community, people can create a similar sort of vehicle for other ventures, but likewise others can just replicate it. We provide the constitutions and shareholder agreements and things and trust structures for anyone that's interested in taking it and applying it somewhere else.
Right, and in terms of the ownership structure, but also the playbook for being able to go out and get a regulatory trial kind of land certificate or...
Yeah, we're certainly working with, I think, up to nearly 40 landowners around the country who are keen to grow with us. And so we're saying, we'll those that are keen, we can take them on a journey and help get them licensed. And those are just the ones that have some assets and resources. There's also probably hundreds, I think we're up to about 200 Māori landowners in Tairāwhiti and in other parts of the country that don't necessarily have capital beyond their land, who are also keen to help get licensed and become growers as part of a national sort of cooperative or network of growers. So there's definitely those opportunities, and we're keen to work with others around those.
And so in terms of that, like you're having to kind of spearhead not only taking a lot of first-time growers or people involved in the business on the journey, but also navigate an evolving regulatory landscape. So what kind of ability do you have to plan at the moment? Because it seems like, things are all heading in a direction where you can see the trend lines, but you can't absolutely guarantee it. How does that work with banks and, oh boy?
Yeah, it's been frustrating and exciting and nerve-wracking. And some of our staff and board members, shareholders are used to much more mature industries and less regulated ones, I guess. So working in a highly regulated environment where you don't know what the regulations are is, like you say, super complex and unpredictable. So we've got a range of scenarios, I suppose, and we try to keep the options open as long as we can. And as things firm up, we have a conversation with the officials or the politicians or the laws passed, and then, different things are progressing. We're able to lock down particular decisions and be ready to move quickly at that point. We've been able to maintain that first mover advantage, and we're keen to continue to lead in New Zealand.
You were the first with a medical cannabis license?
First company, I think there was a university that had a license for research, and so first company with a medical cannabis research license and for breeding, and first company to have THC, high THC strains added to the license, and high CBD strains as well. So we like to try and stay ahead if we can, and we'll work hard to do that.
And how much kind of give and take is there in terms of the regulatory environment? I note that, you've been a real advocate for allowing people who have fallen foul of prohibition laws, who have the growing experience, to get jobs doing what they know that are well paid and mean that crime is not needed. And there's been a pretty frosty political reception from some and a welcoming from others.
Yeah, certainly there's... overall, I think there's consensus around medical cannabis is important. It's scientifically validated. We need an industry around that to enable more affordable products to be accessible to New Zealanders. And it presents some great economic development opportunities for regions and the country as a whole. So I think all the politicians can agree on that part of it. The details, there's some parties that, I think a lot of it is posturing, and they're looking for ways to, particularly the opposition, to sort of get one over on the government, and unfortunately some of our people are the pawns in those processes. And there's also legitimate concerns that we want this industry to be sustainable and for the public to have confidence in the way things work. But generally the officials and the politicians we have in power at the moment seem quite keen to make sure that it is a sustainable industry, that it is going to work for everybody, that the benefits are spread as widely as possible around the country. And so generally I've found them fairly open-minded, and we're certainly not calling the shots, but we're giving good examples of how things can work, and particularly from overseas, what the evidence is for different approaches. So I'm fairly impressed with the current political and bureaucratic environment. There's plenty that people can take issue with, and I do regularly as well with some of the decisions and positions, and we just got to keep providing constructive propositions that are reasonable and make it easy for the politicians and the bureaucrats to support those approaches.
I guess the flip side to the kind of excitement of having $2 million of crowdfunding equity, and a lot of it from local people, is that weight of responsibility as well. Like it's significant investments for people, and there's a lot of kind of hope riding on it, especially in an industry like this where there's so much kind of media hype around it as well. How do you navigate all of that?
Yeah, it is a big challenge, and some of our people are our harshest critics, and there's certainly high expectations that we've raised in the process of raising the funds and of sharing the journey with the community. So that is a responsibility we take super seriously, and every time I catch a taxi and spend $50, that's one nanny. I can remember them giving me that $50 and their hopes are in that funds, and I've just blown it on 5 minutes sort of thing. But those are the things that keep us grounded. We've got a staff member who is dedicated to those relationships with the community and ensuring that communication is happening regularly, and maintaining the confidence of the community and addressing concerns when they're raised. We've had a hemp growing course for 3 years now in partnership with the local Polytech EIT, and that's been super popular around the country. Hundreds and hundreds of people have applied for it. We've tried to keep it just for locals, and those people that are coming through that course are expecting jobs in the cannabis industry, so we need to ensure that those jobs are coming. And part of that is laying a really solid foundation to build on, so the jobs may not be coming as quickly as people had hoped, and part of that is the constraint of the regulations and how quickly that can move, and part of it is setting up a new company and developing medical products is a complex and time-consuming process, but we are moving as quickly as we can, and we have 20-something jobs at the moment, and expected to increase quite significantly in the next year.
And although the crowdfunding kind of makes the headlines, that must be a small drop in the bucket of the amount of investment that's required to start a new industry, turn a crop into bioactives, build infrastructure in an area where maybe there weren't bioactives being produced from crops. Like, yeah. What's involved like that?
Yeah, there's certainly. We were pretty optimistic with what we thought we could do with a few $1 million, and it turns out we need a few million more, so there'll be another opportunity for people to join the journey in a few months' time. But we have technical infrastructure challenges, and at this stage it's looking difficult to build a manufacturing facility close to Ruatoria, putting a medicines factory in the cow paddock with no guaranteed water supply, or the electricity up the coast is really limited. It presents some real challenges. We're still committed to cultivation on the coast, and if we can, we're going to do extraction and hopefully manufacturing as well. But it's looking really tough. So we have opportunities in Gisborne as well, so it's still within the region. And we're exploring, as I say, all options and making some decisions in the next few weeks about getting on with some building. We have the licensed facility at the moment. That's 12 k's up a gravel road, purposefully quite isolated so that it can be used for breeding outdoors, as well as security and so on. That's getting done up. It's a wool shed that we're pouring $3.5 million into shortly, and expanding our footprint there. But, and again, people are like, why would you do that? It's so remote, so isolated. You're going to have to bus workers up every day and so on. It was a really large sheep farm back in the day, and there was a school there, and so there's still housing around, and some of our workers are actually moving back into those houses, which is quite cool. But yeah, it's there's real challenges. There's challenges with multiply owned Māori land and securing. We want to build a $10 million facility on your land, and there's 3,000 owners or 300 owners, and we need to be able to get some security of tenure and ensure that the owners in the next generation are comfortable with those sort of investments if we're going to put it on your land. So yeah, complex, and we've got an awesome team working on those complexities and being able to make good progress in the meantime.
And a very special set of challenges to navigate as well as the East Coast and through that whole land area. One of the few places in the country where Māori haven't been alienated from land, and you still have that enormous tangle of communal ownership and long-term perspectives, which is so different. Yeah,
and that's a great advantage in many ways that, people aren't going anywhere, and so infrastructure and things, those investments can be made because they know that they're investing for future generations that are going to also be responsible for the land, and families, landowners are trying to make better decisions in terms of the environmental impacts of economic opportunities. And so we're hoping again to present a range of industries which have very low impact but very high economic returns and job opportunities. So yeah, it's complex, but and would have made, purely economic sort of perspective, we would have gone to a centre where there's already factories and sheds that we could take straight away and put stuff in. And so yeah, it's been interesting that we've been able to maintain the lead to date while also navigating these complexities. Well,
the flip side of that inalienation was like chronic underinvestment as a country in that area. I mean, you mentioned before the insecurity of water supply and power supply. And, it's only a couple of hours up the road from Gisborne or a couple of hours down the road from Oporiki, but it's so remote in terms of infrastructure.
Yes, and, we're looking at off-grid options and that kind of stuff, but it is an unfortunate legacy of colonisation and just successive governments that it's sort of a vicious cycle of low population that then doesn't attract much attention from politicians and public investment.
And are there things now like the regional growth fund and the kind of regional focus of the government that are able to step in and see this?
We hope so. We haven't had any government funding to date, which again people find a bit surprising. And I think, again, the cannabis, we did talk to government about the Provincial Growth Fund, and the feeling was because the legislation hadn't passed, it was difficult for them to commit much or anything. So we're still having those conversations, and now the legislation has passed. I think there are some of those opportunities, and certainly other iwi and rural communities are looking into the cannabis space and talking to government about support for them. So may make sense to have a national sort of project around it that can support a number of regions potentially.
And how's your journey been personally in this, Manu? Like, what was your background before this, and what did you have to kind of like change up in your skill set in order to carry so much in one project?
Yeah, I've certainly never been the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company before, and my background has mostly been in youth work and community development. And I guess that's kind of where the genesis of this came from, in that kind of community development in the economic sense. And so, yeah, there's been a lot of upskilling, particularly in the investment world, sort of how that all works. And when we were looking for institutional investors and needing to present, sort of put our best foot forward, but also to check them out and work out which partners were a good match and which weren't. We needed good advice. And one of our commitments from the start with Hikurangi has been to get the best technical expertise that we can at any time, whether that's lawyers or accountants or investment bankers and so on. So picking those partners has been really important, and investing, and sometimes like, oh my God, look at their hourly rate or whatever it is, but that it super pays off in our experience.
If you think it's expensive to hire the best, wait till you hire the not best.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, one of our lawyers is an old school friend, and I thought I was going to get mates rates, but but he's been awesome, super, super good in terms of that structure, super thorough, and so it's, again, prepared a really solid platform. It's been a lot of upskilling, talking about marketing and channels and categories and segments. Is while I did a design degree and worked in an advertising agency for a year, it was just on the sort of doing the design, not on actually how you develop a product and get it to market. The medical area, pharmaceuticals industry and science. I wish I'd done chemistry or biology at university instead of design now, but it's there's a lot of areas that I've had to get to grips with quite quickly. And one of my sort of skills, I think, has been networking and joining expertise together to make something greater than the sum of the parts sort of thing. So I think that particular, and Panapa shares those skills. So together we've been able to use those to create what's there to date. But no real business background, and I really didn't think I'd still be CEO now. And I said to the board, I don't want to be CEO, and they said, well, does anyone know more about medical cannabis in New Zealand at the moment? And we'll make sure you got the support around you that you need. And many of those board members are very, very successful business people. So having them and their networks around us makes me feel safe and confident moving forward.
Yeah, and everyone who hasn't done it before is in the same position. Yeah. And I guess I wonder if that's like a something that in such a big market that's all being built as you go. There must be so many entrepreneurs all around the world who are just laying the tracks in front of themselves. Yeah,
and plenty that will fail along the way, unfortunately. But also plenty of cool people that are trying to give it a go because they believe in the kaupapa. It may not be about the job creation; it's usually about the patients and making sure that we can get effective, affordable medicines to people as quickly as possible. So we're working hard on collaboration within New Zealand and overseas as well to get the best out of everybody and see where there's opportunities to create success together.
And tell me about that international demand, because after getting the first company to get the medical cannabis license, very soon after, big international companies were signing, send us everything you can grow kind of, or extract kind of deals, weren't they?
Yeah, and they weren't necessarily big companies, but they were companies who had big opportunities to, if they can secure supply. So there's a number of brokers around the world. And then there's also, in Canada particularly, we've got a partner there who is saying we'll take everything you can get because we've got a massive shortage now, and particularly in the medical sector where cannabis has been diverted to where there's more money quickly to be made in recreational and also in selling into places like Germany and Europe where they can get a better price for it. So there's definitely opportunity and demand there, and it's a nice place to be. And the challenge is to get there first, because everywhere in the world is now ramping up. And not everywhere, but lots of places. So there will in time, prices will come down quite quickly, I think, for the commodity. And so we see the real value long term in the R&D and in novel sort of product development and evidence based. And then there's the New Zealand brand, but that's only really of value in that sort of legalized over the counter market, medical market. Just want it to be affordable and effective, and not necessarily in those order. So there's some opportunity there, but there's definitely interest globally. There's definitely demand at present. We see that lasting for maybe 5 years, and then it'll start to taper off because production's shifting to South America, Africa, and Asia, who will always be able to produce it at a decent quality at a much, much lower cost than we can.
And so what does success look like in 10 years' time for Hikurangi's kind of family of companies around the cannabis?
Yeah, I guess success looks like locals having real ownership in those enterprises and that value accruing to Ruatoria and the East Coast communities. It looks like sustainable jobs that are well paid and safe for people to work in. And it looks like us helping the world to solve problems, health conditions and nutritional issues. So, it's sort of both the local and the global, the national and international. So there's lots, as we said, lots of expectations and lots of hope. And we're confident in 10 years we're going to be in a good position. So that's sort of what success looks like at the moment. And that nanny who gave me $50, many of them said, I'm not going to be around to see this succeed. I'm doing it for my mokopuna. And so I'm hoping that success looks like those mokopuna are proud of their grandparents for taking a punt on us and backing us when lots of people didn't think it was going to be possible.
That's so cool. Thank you for sharing the journey. That's Manu Kadi, the CEO of Hikurangi Cannabis. Thank you for joining us today. Yeah, and if you are interested in finding out more about the journey, head on and look at the Hikurangi Cannabis website. There's information about another crowdfund that will be coming up sometime later in the year, so there are more ways to get involved in the journey. Thank you very much to Jose Barbosa for producing, and thank you very much for having us along and listening.
You've been listening to Business is Boring, presented by Simon Pound. And brought to you by the Spinoff and Callaghan Innovation.
From the Spinoff Podcast Network, that was Business is Boring, brought to you by SparkLab. Make sure you're following Business is Boring wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information on SparkLab, visit sparklab.co.nz. Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. The Spinoff Podcast Network.